Long before Artemis Entreri ever crossed paths with Drizzt, he was orphaned, sold by his mother to a caravan out of Memnon, a beginning so drenched in horror he would spend the rest of his life refusing to remember. He escaped being sold by the merchants who bought him and carved out a territory in the outer slums of Calimport, in a muddy lane of shacks and drunks nobody else wanted. After 5 hard years of survival, every person on that street feared him, and he liked that. Fear had become his path to safety. Then the Macedoni cabal sent a thug to test him. This thug was really just a teenager, but older and more developed than Entreri by several years. He moved to claim Entreri's territory as his own, laughing as he approached for his kill. Entreri responded with a handful of sand and a flat-edged stone, leaving the thug to die on the street, his throat open wide. This confrontation had been an audition, one that Entreri passed. He was recruited into the Macedoni cabal, one of the strongest and most feared thieves' guilds in Calimport. Thebal's Royuset, a sadistic and gluttonous senior guild member, was assigned to Entreri, making his first months in the guild miserable. So Entreri set a trap. He rigged a spinning table game to land a poison drink in front of Thebal's. Thebal's survived because he had conditioned himself against the venom, but Entreri had also poisoned a cake in Thebal's private room. Thebal's used a magical antidote and ate the cake anyway. It wasn't the poison that killed him. Entreri had planned 3 levels deep. He had mixed crushed glass into the cake. There's no antidote for crushed glass. Thebal's death made room for a new lieutenant. Pasha Macedoni called Entreri a cold-hearted wretch and promoted him. What Macedoni had found was a young man who had converted every wound the world gave him into a tool, so completely and for so long that the wounds themselves were gone. What remained was control, calculation, and absolute commitment. At 14 years old, Artemis Entreri was a lieutenant of the Macedoni Guild and on his way to becoming the most feared and deadly assassin in Calimport. Pasha Macedoni became Entreri's mentor in the fullest sense, and would later say he watched the young assassin grow the way a father watches a son. In time, his reputation carried him beyond the guild entirely. He took contracts from the highest bidder, and the most significant client he found was a powerful pasha named Puk. The dagger that would define his career came to him through Pasha Puk. Forged by a Thayan necromancer named Thivris Ul in 959 DR, the jeweled dagger was stolen by Ul's apprentice within a 10-day, beginning a chain of theft and murder that stretched across centuries. When Entreri killed the apprentice's great-great-grandson on Puk's orders, the blade passed to him. The jeweled dagger became an extension of Entreri's will, draining the life essence of its victims and feeding the wielder in the process. Physically and psychically, Entreri used it to let his targets feel their souls leaving their bodies, whispering to them in their final moments about the emptiness ahead. It was as an assassin and with his signature weapon that Entreri became a name conjured in nightmares throughout the Sword Coast. The only cost he paid was that of his youth and his innocence. It was all working out perfectly for Entreri until he took a job to chase a halfling to Icewind Dale and cross blades with a dark elf in the tunnels of Mithril Hall. Pasha Puk sent Entreri north with a single assignment. A halfling named Regis had stolen his ruby pendant and fled to the frozen settlements of Icewind Dale. Entreri would get it back. Regis was already gone by the time Entreri arrived in Bryn Shander. He had left with Drizzt, Brunner, and Wulfgar on a quest to find the lost dwarven stronghold of Mithril Hall. Entreri searched the halfling's empty house, found his guild ring, and confirmed that he had his man. All he needed now was a direction. Catti-brie, Brunner's adopted daughter, came back to the house with 2 dwarven companions. Entreri was waiting for them. He killed both dwarves and took Catti-brie, interrogating her about Regis's route and the pendant. She told him what she could, and he let her live. But he made it clear he wanted the halfling, and anyone who got in his way would die. The trail led to Luskan, where Entreri made a deal with Dindybar the Mottled, a corrupt wizard of the host tower of the Arcane who was tracking the companions, thinking Drizzt was carrying the artifact Grinshinaban. Entreri used the Alliance for what it offered: a golem, a soldier, a mage, and a faster road north. He kept his own plans to himself. The group reached the companions at Mithril Hall. Entreri and Drizzt met for the first time in a deep chamber of the stronghold. Two fighters, perfectly matched, saber and jeweled dagger against twin scimitars. The fight was cut short when both of them fell into Garam's Gorge after an old trap was triggered. They landed at the bottom alive, surrounded by Duergar and hostile tunnels. Drizzt had fallen unfavorably, losing a scimitar and hurting his leg. This gave Entreri the upper hand. Instead of killing Drizzt then and there, Entreri made a practical offer. They would fight their way out together with the help of Drizzt's dark vision, and in exchange, Drizzt would persuade Regis to hand over the pendant. Drizzt agreed. They fought back-to-back through the dark, reading each other's movements without speaking. Two fighters so closely matched that the Duergar had no answer for them. For Drizzt, it was unsettling. He was fighting alongside a version of what he might have become, a man with every physical gift and none of the moral foundation. For Entreri, it revealed something that bothered him for years to come: that Drizzt's compassion, which he had always called weakness, was not the limitation he had assumed. When they reached the surface, Entreri betrayed their agreement. He took Regis and the pendant. He pulled a lever, dropping the bridge into the gorge. He held Guinevar's figurine, which he had claimed after their fall, over the edge and dared Drizzt to follow him south. Drizzt promised he would. Entreri disappeared into the dark. He had what Pook wanted, but the fight with Drizzt was still unfinished, and that became the driving force for the next years of Entreri's life. Entreri moved south with Regis in tow, first by ship from Waterdeep, then overland through Baldur's Gate. He used the ruby pendant to hypnotize a harbor master and secure fast passage to Calimport. He burned a ship and killed the crew to eliminate witnesses. These were routine tasks. What occupied him was the pendant itself. Alone on deck at night, Entreri studied the ruby, testing its pull against his will. The gem was more powerful than he had assumed. It had briefly caught even him. He disciplined himself against it and filed the knowledge away, but holding Guinevar's onyx figurine in his fingers and staring north across the sea, he was not thinking about the pendant. He was thinking about Drizzt. He delivered Regis and the ruby to Pasha Pook on his return to Calimport, completing the assignment. The reunion, though, was strained. Pook had dispatched pirates to kill Drizzt and the companions at sea, interfering with what Entreri considered his private affair. The guild had changed after his years on the road. Pook's new power broker was a were-rat named Rasalvatore. Entreri despised him on sight. Drizzt and the companions arrived in Calimport within weeks. Entreri used his network to track their movements and set a trap to funnel them toward him through the city's sewers and toward the meeting he had been planning since Garam's Gorge. They met in a tunnel beneath the city. Entreri's planned trap separated the companions from Drizzt, and the two met for the second time in combat. Again, they were perfectly matched fighters, each reading the other's patterns, neither finding a clean opening. Entreri drew first blood with a cut to Drizzt's shoulder. Then Drizzt set him up, letting an apparent mistake bait Entreri's dagger forward and sliced into the back of the assassin's elbow. Wounded and losing, Entreri fought his way to the street above. With Catti-brie's bow trained on him and Drizzt pressing forward, he escaped by pulling Agatha's mask from Drizzt's face, shouting, "Drow!" to the crowd gathering around them. Agatha's mask had been hiding Drizzt's true heritage, disguising him as a surface elf. Entreri slipped into the mob while the companions dealt with an armed and hostile audience. Pook died to Guinevar in the chaos of Regis's rescue. Rasalvatore found Entreri afterward and proposed a partnership to take control of the city. Entreri's response? "First, I work alone," Entreri said, driving a dagger into the were-rat's spine. "And second, you are dead." Across the city, Drizzt spent 5 days in his room recovering from his wounds. Entreri was in hiding, healing and preparing for his next move. Neither man had truly won, and Artemis Entreri was not finished with Drizzt Do'Urden. Regis arrived in Mithril Hall with the news from the south. Entreri had taken control of Calimport's guild in the aftermath of Pook's death. He had also supposedly lost the use of an arm and an eye from the wounds Drizzt had given him. As far as Drizzt was concerned, the war with Entreri was finished. He had no desire to return south to resume it. But Entreri was already inside Mithril Hall. He had come north disguised as Regis, using Agatha's mask. Where Drizzt had used it to pass as a surface elf, Entreri wore it to become someone else entirely. He moved through the stronghold's corridors, observing, and began subtly manipulating Wulfgar with the ruby pendant. This plan was bigger than just Entreri. Vierna, Drizzt's fanatical sister, had located him and proposed a deal. Help her capture Drizzt for Lolth, and he would have his chance to fight the Drow in single combat first. Entreri agreed, though his actual working relationship was with Jarlaxle, the mercenary leader of Bregan Dierth. In Jarlaxle's pragmatic opportunism, Entreri recognized something familiar, a man who understood the world as it was. When he finally stepped out of the shadows and confronted Drizzt, not only was he in perfect fighting health, he also had the real Regis as prisoner. Entreri used the halfling as leverage to force the fight he had been planning since the sewers of Calimport. They fought for the third time on a narrow mountain ledge outside Mithril Hall with a sheer drop below. It was the most intense fight of their rivalry. Entreri was precise, controlled, and completely consumed by the desire to end it. When Drizzt appeared to slip and lose a scimitar, Entreri lunged for the kill. Drizzt tripped him over the edge. Entreri drove his sword through Drizzt's foot to stop himself falling, gripped the blade, and hung in the open air 200 feet above the valley floor. Drizzt set his jaw and turned his foot until the blade slipped free. Entreri fell. But he had chosen this location for the fight, and he still had tricks to play. His cloak transformed as he dropped, sprouting bat wings, carrying him out into the open air of the mountain valley. He had planned for this. He turned back toward Drizzt, who was now sliding down a loose stone face below the ledge, and made his passes. Flying, every advantage was his. He scored hits with his sword on each approach, driving Drizzt closer to losing his grip on the slope entirely. Drizzt pulled a hand crossbow taken from a drow soldier he had killed earlier and fired. The quarrel hit Entreri in the neck. The sleeping poison moved fast through a major artery. Entreri tore it free, but the damage was done. His vision blurred, his mind slipped, and without conscious guidance, the magical cloak flew on without him. He careened across the valley, hitting walls, shattering his left arm, then he smashed headlong into a mountain wall at the far end of the valley. The impact tore the cloak apart and broke the enchantment, and he fell. Regis found him a day later hanging from the shreds of the torn cloak on a rocky spur. His cheekbone was shattered, his face was torn, multiple bones were broken. Regis recovered his ruby pendant, Agatha's mask, and even took the jeweled dagger from the helpless assassin, then cut the remaining seam of the cloak. Artemis Entreri, it seemed, had run out of tricks. It was Jarlaxle who found him. The mercenary pulled Entreri out of the ravine outside Mithril Hall, nursed him back to some version of health, and made him an offer he was in no position to refuse: come to Menzoberran Zan. Entreri would later understand that it had never been an offer. He arrived in the Drow city as Iblith, the Drow word for surface-dwelling offal or excrement. In a city of 20,000, he ranked below every one of them. With an enchantment that allowed him to see in the dark, Bregan Dierth put him to work herding goblin slaves at Lake Donigarten. He had also inadvertently killed a matron mother. House Horlbar was looking for whoever had done it. The man who had always been the most deadly in any room spent his days trying not to be noticed and his nights wondering if he would survive to see sunlight again. He tried to escape, but the Underdark was a maze of tunnels full of things he had no idea how to fight. Entreri admitted to Jarlaxle something he could barely put into words. After 2 losses to Drizzt, he no longer burned the way he once had. He kept saying he had been the Drow's fighting equal, but the words had started to sound hollow even to himself. Drizzt arrived on his own not long after, descending into the Underdark voluntarily, believing his presence in Mithril Hall was the cause of the coming Drow invasion. He made it as far as the Isle of Rothe, a small island on the underground lake Donnygarten in the eastern end of Menzoberranzan. There, having just finished fighting 2 Drow soldiers, exhausted and off balance, he found Entreri rushing out of a nearby hollow. The shock of recognition cost him. He had no idea Entreri was in Menzoberranzan, let alone watching from the shadows, waiting for exactly that moment. Entreri had timed it perfectly. He stripped both scimitars from Drizzt in a systematic exchange, kicked Twinkle off the ledge entirely, and drove Drizzt over the edge with a forearm to the face. Catti-brie had followed Drizzt to the Underdark and was present but already being overcome by sleeping poison from a hand crossbow quarrel and couldn't stop the Drow from taking him. Drizzt was captured and handed over to House Baenri, imprisoned in the dungeons and subjected to prolonged torture at the hands of Vendez Baenri, while Matron Baenri prepared a high ritual with him as sacrifice. To Entreri and Catti-brie's surprise, Jarlaxle laid out a plan to rescue Drizzt, offering Entreri his only way out of the Underdark. Entreri and Catti-brie infiltrated Sorcier, the Drow Wizard Academy, then broke Drizzt out of House Baenri. They fought their way through the tunnels and out of the city. They parted on the same ledge where Drizzt and Entreri had once fought. They made an informal truce to never see each other again. Menzoberranzan had held up a mirror to Artemis Entreri, a city of 20,000 people exactly like him, and it had broken something in him that he didn't know how to fix. Entreri returned to Calimport a different man. Walking the streets of his old city for the first time in years, he was challenged by a teenage thug claiming territory on the lane where Entreri had grown up. The assassin, who would have killed the boy without a thought a decade earlier, reached into his purse, tossed a few coins, and walked on. The guild structure had changed in his absence. Bassadoni was now ancient and only a figurehead. 3 lieutenants ran the operation: Cadron, Gordion, Charlotta, and Hand. When they gave Entreri a routine enforcement job to prove his loyalty on his return, he refused. The work was beneath him. That refusal started a war. The war nearly ended before it started. A battle mage, hired as a bounty hunter, cornered Entreri in a building burning down around him, firewalls blocking every exit, 2 enchanted blades pursuing him through the smoke. He came close to choosing the flames. Then a disembodied hand reached through a dimensional door and offered a way out. He leapt through it. On the other side were Jarlaxle and Camuriel. Jarlaxle had come to Calimport with Bregin positioning himself as a trade bridge between the surface city and Menzoberranzan. He chose Entreri as its frontman. But in a private conversation that Entreri found difficult to dismiss, the mercenary offered more than a business arrangement. He told Entreri the truth about himself. Menzoberranzan had emptied him. Jarlaxle said because he had seen his own existence played out on a grand scale, a city living exactly as he lived and for exactly the same reasons. The one thing blocking every other aspiration was the unresolved fight with Drizzt Do'Urden, so Jarlaxle told Entreri he would deliver Drizzt to him. Once Entreri was on board, Jarlaxle and Bregin took control of House Bassadoni. In the aftermath, Entreri found Charlotta caught in the act of finishing Pasha Bassadoni herself. He stopped her, then looked at Bassadoni laying frail in his bed, a hollow figurehead of the man who had once been the most powerful guildmaster in Calimport. He put his sword through the old man's heart. Drizzt, along with the companions, were carrying Crunchinabon toward Spirit Soaring to be destroyed. Jarlaxle tricked him, claiming the shard for himself. He then maneuvered them into a crystalline tower raised using the artifact's power. Inside, he had constructed a chamber specifically for a duel, neutralizing all magic, all innate abilities, all enchantments. Drizzt and Entreri would fight on equal terms with no advantages. Once he understood what was happening, Drizzt refused to draw his weapons. He dropped them to the floor and asked Entreri whether their lives had to be permanently dedicated to revenge on whoever had won the last encounter. Entreri was furious. He threatened to run him through. Eventually, Drizzt picked up his scimitars. They fought their most complete fight. It was Drizzt who came out on top. He had Entreri's dagger arm twisted out and a scimitar at the assassin's throat. He wouldn't finish it. He pushed Entreri away instead. Then Entreri came back, charging, yelling, deliberately giving himself away. He wanted Drizzt to kill him. Camuriel intervened before Drizzt could finish it, creating a kinetic barrier around Entreri, absorbing the blow and channeling its force back through Entreri's hands into Drizzt's chest. Drizzt fell bloody to the ground. Entreri dropped to his knees beside him. "What have I done?" he said, pressing at the wound. Jarlaxle's lieutenant and priest of Loth, Rhaegai Bondalek, healed Drizzt in secret, leaving Entreri to believe it was truly over. Entreri now had his answer. Even if it was not the one he had hoped for, the obsession was broken. Back in Calimport, Entreri made his way to Don Don's room at the Copper Ante. Don Don Tiggerwillies had been the closest thing to a friend Entreri had ever known. It was the only relationship in his life that had ever come close to that word. He found Don Don chained by the ankle, surrounded by food and women, having surrendered everything that had once defined him. Entreri recognized him as a man who had simply given up. What unsettled him more was how much of himself he saw in that room. Entreri put his blade through Don Don's heart. With Bassadoni dead, he was now the ruler of the guild, the most powerful man on the streets of Calimport. Drizzt Do'Urden, he believed, was dead, killed by his own hand, even if it wasn't the ending he wanted. He wondered if it even mattered. For the first time in 30 years, Artemis Entreri had no answer. There is a lot more to the story of Artemis Entreri, but I will save his tales through the Sellswords trilogy and Neverwinter saga and beyond for future videos. If you want to support the channel and gain access to my custom 5.5e D&D stat blocks of Entreri and his weapons, and all of the other Legend of Drizzt characters, consider checking out the Drow Historian Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week for more lore from the Forgotten Realms and the Legend of Drizzt.